In this video I want to show how you can use the Reaper Digital Audio Workstation for live looping using the standard Super 8 looping plugin together with an additional one which I made. As a reminder, let's look at some live looping sessions. Ed Sheeran has made a lot of videos which are available on YouTube. Another nice one is from Taylor Reid. I will put the links in the descriptions below. So if you want to do live looping, you either purchase a rather expensive looper, or you can use the Reaper DAW together with some plugins and inexpensive foot pedal and MIDI controller. So what you need is at least, of course, the Reaper Digital Audio Workstation. Next thing you need is the Super 8 Looper plugin. This one is explained by Kenny Joya on YouTube. I will put a link in the description below. Next thing you need is an additional plugin to control the looper plugin, and it controls the input to the Super 8 looper plugin. As an example, these MIDI notes 36 and 37 are associated with the inputs for this slot in the looper, 36 and 37. Next thing you need is a foot pedal or a foot switch. Again, these are defined with parameters in the plugin. And optionally, you also need a hardware MIDI controller defined by these settings, whether you have one, yes or no, and what the note numbers are for arming and playing the looper. In my case, I use a Complete Audio 6 hardware interface. It has multiple channels, up to 6 I think. I already had a very inexpensive MIDI keyboard with a 1/4-inch jack input for a sustained foot pedal. And I used the Akai LPD8 MIDI controller, which has 8 pads and 8 control knobs. So with this setup, we can control 4 slots of the Super 8 looper. And if you have other hardware, you could go up to 8. And another way to use multiple slots is to have multiple foot pedals. So you either use one foot pedal and control with the MIDI controller the arming and playing of the slots, or you can use one foot pedal per slot and control the recording and playing back. So let's start with the basic setup of the Super 8 Looper plugin. Most of it is explained in Kenny Joya's video, so I will just do a quick summary here. Let's start with the preferences as I use them. As a device, I have the Complete Audio. I use 4 hardware channels here. I have defined Complete Audio as a MIDI device as well as LPD8, and both are enabled to input control signals. So that's what you would need also. You could have other devices, but they would need to be enabled for both notes and control signals. As another preference I use, which may be different from your case, whenever I insert a new track, it will automatically be armed, this setting, and it will have monitor input on. So in your case, you may have to do that yourself, here for the arming and here for the monitoring. So let's add the Super 8 MIDI controlled synchronized looper, the standard plugin available with Reaper in your latest download. The looper has 8 slots, all functioning in mono, so it can record and playback in mono. The slots operate independently, except that they all use the same timer, and the timer of the looper is determined by the first recording. So whatever you record first, whether it's slot 1 or 8, doesn't matter, that determines the timer until you do a kill here and you delete everything, including all the recordings in the slots and the timer. There's a latch setting on and off. If the latch is off, recording and playback would start immediately as soon as you click with the mouse or use the keyboard MIDI notes. And if latch is on, recording and playback will be delayed until the next cycle in the looper. So for your first recording it will start immediately, but after your first recording, whenever you do a new recording or a new playback, it will be delayed until the end of the cycle. With the standard setup I get input from one mono channel, as a Reaper track by default has 2 channels. In my case, the input will be routed to channel 1 and channel 2, typically for a stereo signal. So my guitar is attached to the first hardware channel, and as you see, it is routed to slot 1 and slot 2, both. If I would need the guitar in slot 3 and 4 also, I would change the plug-in pin connector. First of all, extend the number of channels. I now have 4 channels, and I want hardware channel 1 to be routed to plug-in channel 1 to 4. So in this case, the guitar will be routed to all 4 slots. It's still mono. If I select one, a slot, we will hear the audio output here on the right. We will solve this mono aspect by adding additional audio tracks for the output of the slot, and then we will convert the mono to the stereo. So this is all standard Super 8 looper. We want to route mono source 1 to stereo in this track. We don't need MIDI. Okay, let's call this the looper 1. Let's call this slot 1. We don't want the looper to be outputting to the master anymore, because that's mono, we don't want that. But we do want this one to output to the master. So now we have a stereo signal which is routed via this track. So now we could use the looper as is, but we would need to use the mouse clicks or MIDI notes for starting and stopping each slot. And as a guitar player, that is not easy to do. You prefer a foot pedal. That's why I made a new plugin to convert the signal from the foot pedal to the MIDI notes for the looper slots. Let's add that one here. It's called the MIDI controller for Super 8 looper. Oops. And it has a number of parameters. First of all, whether you have a foot pedal or a foot switch, or maybe even both. The difference being that the foot pedal generates a MIDI change control signal, a CC signal, whereas the foot switch would generate a MIDI note. So for the foot switch, it would need to be a toggle switch. If you push it once, it will send a MIDI note on. If you push it again, it will send the same MIDI note off. And for the pedal, you would need a pedal value, which is in this case 64. That's typically for the sustain pedal connected to the MIDI keyboard. You need the value for the up position and the down position. And in my case, that's just the other way around. Here we define the note numbers for the slots in the Super8 looper plugin. So for the first slot it's 36 and 37, rec note and play note. And here we define whether we have a external MIDI controller like the LPD8, and we will add that later on. At the moment we will only use the foot pedal. So now we get audio output from looper 1 to slot 1. We can control the MIDI input of looper 1 via the plugin here in slot 1, but we still need MIDI input here. We don't get any MIDI at the moment. These are both audio channels, so the best way to do that is to add a MIDI channel where we will route all MIDI to wherever we want it. In this case we will input all MIDI channels from all devices, and we will route MIDI to slot 1, no audio, MIDI all. So now MIDI is inputted here. If we touch the keyboard we see the MIDI signal coming in. We want MIDI to come in this plugin and to enter again and be routed to the looper. So we want an additional MIDI router from here, a MIDI send from track 2 to track 1, no audio, all MIDI. So now MIDI will be input here, will be sent to track 2, will be converted from the foot pedal signal to the correct MIDI notes, and then will be sent to track 1. If we now look at the audio signal, we see that we don't hear the audio anymore. That's because Reaper decided that we have a potential feedback loop. We are sending audio from track 1 to track 2. This send audio from this track to slot 1, which is track 2, and we also receive a send from track 2 to track 1. This is audio only, no MIDI. This is MIDI only. So in reality there will not be a feedback loop, but Reaper stays on the safe side and decides that it will block the signal. If we want to enable it, we need to go to the project settings, advanced, and here we could say we will allow feedback in routing. So we will override the Reaper setting, and now we get the audio again. So let's do a looping with using the mouse clicks, the default mode. Let's do the same. Let's kill this recording and do the same with the foot pedal. We don't hear it now. Okay. So you see, if I push the foot pedal it will start recording, and if I push it again it will stop recording and start playing. Same as would happen if I use the mouse clicks. So this one is operating correctly. We can record multiple layers in each slot, but then the problem is that we cannot play back each layer independently. So in a general case we would record new layers in new slots, enabling us to start and stop playback during the live session. So we have now one slot available. Let's make it 4 slots. We will duplicate this one. We will correct the settings of the plugin. It's the same pedal. We will now use 38 and 39. We want to receive from audio 2. Do it again. '41, '42. Receive from channel 3. And the last one, receive from channel 4. And 43 and 44. So we now have 4 slots. Output, we can record them independently. If we do a recording within the Reaper DAW, then we would typically only want to record these 4 audio slots and not the rest. So we will disable recording here and disable recording here. Now there's a little problem. Whenever we start a recording, if I push the foot pedal, it would start on all 4 slots. That's because in every slot we defined 64 as the foot pedal, so we have the same foot pedal on all 4 slots. If you want to solve this, you can either have multiple foot pedals where you define a different value here or here as the note value, so you can have one foot pedal for each slot, or you can use an external MIDI controller which can be used to arm the correct slot that we want to record in, and also be used to play back the slot we want to. So let's do this now. In my case, I have the LPD8, which has a editor which you can download from the Akai portal. And with the editor you can define the values of the notes generated by the pads, the type of pad, in this case it needs to be a toggle pad, and you can define the values of the control knobs. So what I did just for the demo, I assigned value 1 to 4 to the lower pads and 5 to 8 for the higher pads, and I've assigned the value 1 to 8 to the control knobs and the values low 0 and high 1 to 7. So this is how I set up the Akai LPD8 pad controller, and as you notice I use 4 slots, which allows me to use 2 pads per slot, and I use this pad for arming and I use this pad for the playback. So the function will be that if both pads are pushed and I use the foot pedal, it will start recording in this slot. If I hit the foot pedal again, it will stop recording, and if I hit the upper pad it will stop the playback. If I hit it again it will start playback. So we'll see later how this will function in practice. So my note values are 1 to 8. So my first arming note is 1 and my first playback note is 5. So this is now the setting for the first slot. Let's save this one. We'll call it looper slot 1. Okay. So let's do the same for the second slot. Yes, we have a MIDI controller. We will use 2 and 6. The same for slot 3. And for okay, we now have defined the LPD8 controller, and if we now want to start recording in slot 1, I would push the arm button first, push the play button, and as you see it will start playing immediately because there's still a recording from a previous session. So let's kill this. So now the slot 1 is arms. If I push the foot pedal, it will start recording. If I push it again, it will stop recording. And if I hit the play pad on the LPD8, it will stop the playback. So now I have one slot. Let's record something in slot 2. And start slot 1. Now let's suppose we want to add a virtual instrument to one of the slots. So not a hardware input, but one of the virtual instruments. We could add a new track. Let's take the simple one here. It's functioning. It will get its MIDI input from all devices. Let's not choose MIDI from the LPD8. So we only want the complete audio MIDI, which includes the MIDI keyboard in my case. So now I get MIDI keyboard input here. And I need to route the output of the virtual instrument as input to a slot. So let's choose slot 4. Add a new send. Audio stereo, it's okay. It will be routed to 4, and we don't want to route any MIDI input. But we also have to define that we don't want the hardware input to flow into this slot, because at the moment the guitar is routed to all 4 slots. So we change this here. we no longer want the guitar to go here, so we will deselect this one and select the fourth one, which will be the virtual instrument. So if we now play the keyboard, we see the audio coming in here. So we can now do a recording in slot 4. We only need to solve one additional thing. That is that at the moment the sustain pedal is connected to the MIDI keyboard. So the virtual instrument here will also receive the sustain pedal and will start sustaining the notes. And we don't want this. So we want to remove the sustain pedal from the MIDI input here. And one simple way to do that is to use the standard note filter. This one. Here you can filter out a range of notes. We don't want that. Let's receive everything from 0 to 1 to 7. But let's block the CC signals, so other events will not be passed through. But it doesn't help because at the moment the note filter is below the virtual instrument and the MIDI signals flows from top to bottom. So we need to insert this in front of the virtual instrument. Now the sustain pedal would no longer influence the virtual instrument, and we should be able to record in slot 4. It starts playback because there is still a recording. Let's kill this one. If I now hit the foot pedal, and stop the playback via the playpad. So to make it an even better looper, we could assign the control knobs of the LPD8 controller to the volume and the pan of the audio tracks. So let's do this. First volume. We want track 2 to be the first slot. If we use the knob, it will learn the value. Okay. This will be the second one. Okay. This will be the third one. Okay. And the fourth one. Okay. Same for panning. Track 2. That's the top row. Channel 5. Value 5. Slot 2. 6. Okay, so we now have a setup. Let's look at the mixer, where we can use the knobs on the LPD8 controller to pan slot 4, pan slot 3, pan slot 2, pan slot 1. So during a live looping session we could use the volume per slot, and we can pan each slot left and right. As you see, this is quite a complex setup, so it would be wise to save this setting in a template. But you might also be tempted to use a parent-child setup here, and you might choose to use either looper 1 or the MIDI router as the parent because there's only one of them and there are multiple other tracks. But then you have to realize that although in the settings we say that we allow feedback, Reaper still does not allow feedback loops from parents to childs. So if the looper 1 would be the parent and these would be the children, then the channels are disabled by Reaper automatically, even though you say allow feedback. So to do a parent-child setup, you would add another audio channel. Let's call this the parent looper parent, maybe better. We'll put this in here. We don't want any input from the hardware, and we will indicate that this is the parent, these are the children. We don't want the MIDI to be sent to the parent, and we don't want the virtual instrument to be sent to the parent. We do want slot 4 parent send up till slot 1 parent send, and we don't want the looper to send to the parent. Okay, so now the parent will send to the master and all 4 slots will send to the parent. So now you can collapse them any way you want. So this is a nice generic setup. We could save this as a template. So let's call this the looper template, which I already have. So just replace it. So we have one looper plugin with 4 channels, and as I said before, each of these slots operate synchronized because the timing is determined by the first recording. If you don't want it, if you want multiple timers, for instance, your first recording of the percussion would be 2 bars and the first recording of the guitar would be 8 bars, then you could use 2 loopers. So you would duplicate this track, have a looper 1 and a looper 2, and if you set your routing right, you will determine which slot will be attached to looper 2 and which of these slots would be attached to looper 1. So whenever you do a first recording in looper 1, it determines the timer of looper 1, and whenever you do a first recording of looper 2, it will determine a new timing in looper 2. This also implies that if there is a slight difference in the timing, then if you run it long enough, it will be out of sync totally. So you have to get your timing right. So let's delete this one again. Until now we have used the looper with one hardware input channel, with the guitar only. Suppose you want 4 independent hardware inputs, one for the guitar, one for the percussion, one for the voice, etc. Then what you do here is input 4 channels, and in the plugin connector you would connect hardware input channel 2 to plugin channel 2, hardware input channel 3 to plugin channel 3, and hardware input channel 4 to plugin channel 4. So now each of the 4 hardware inputs are routed to each of the 4 slots. Finally, some troubleshooting tips. Whenever you're wondering what is happening to the MIDI signals, you could add the Recontrol MIDI plugin, which has a log file. So let's duplicate this one. We now have one in front of the MIDI controller plugin and after the MIDI controller plugin. So if we look what happens if I push the play button on pad 1, you see channel node 1 is on and it's converted into node 37 for the Super 8 looper. If I push it again, there's a node off, and here there's again 37 on and off for the Super 8 looper. If I arm slot 1, so both play and arm node are on, node 1 and node 5. And if I now push the foot pedal, then here you would see the foot pedal, the CC64 value, which is converted to the node 36 for the output. So this way you can in detail see what's happening to MIDI signals coming in and out of plugins. So let's remove this one. Let's remove this one. We're probably still recording. Yes, let's stop that one and kill it. So this makes a rather generic looper, which you can completely control with the foot pedal and the external MIDI controller. The only time you need to grab the mouse is to kill your previous recording. There's no way I can control this one. There's no parameter on the output which I can use. So you do have to use the mouse to kill your previous recording. But for the rest, recording, playback, volume, panning is all done on the LPD8 controller. And as I said before, if you have another controller, if you get your parameters right, you should be able to also use that one. If you want to use the MIDI controller plugin, you can download it from GitHub. I will put a link in the description below, but here this is the link. And in GitHub you can download the file as a zip file. When you open it, this is the plugin. It's the JSFX file. We will copy this one, go to Reaper, Options, Show Reaper Resource Path, go to Effects, and here we can paste the looper. It's already here, so I will skip this one. So once it's in this correct directory, then you either restart Reaper or go to Preferences, VST Rescan. So from here on, the plugin is visible within Reaper and you can apply it as an effect to any track.